So this selection pack is ridiculous. I can't believe we got popular. I'm not even sure this card's legal in the TCG yet. So we technically got it in Master Duel before TCG. So I guess before we get started, if there's a deck that I didn't cover in this tier list video, in the end, you can feel free to leave a comment about it and I'll give you my opinion about it, but just know that if I didn't mention it here, it's probably because I consider it low to mid rogue tier at best, so take that as you will. And we have to start with the new best deck. Pretty sure if anyone's read the cards, this should be no surprise. Pure Snake Eyes. It's the only really way to play it. None of the other fire deck, especially we don't have the Fire King stuff, so there's really no other better way to play the Snake Eyes engine than Pure, and this is definitely not in tier 1.5, definitely tier 1. This is probably going to be, a lot of people are going to be thinking it's the best card, it's the best deck in the game, and for good reason, right? This deck, it plays through everything. There's not a single hand trap that will stop this deck except for Max C and Shifter, and we've been there are decks that play Shifter themselves, they have issues as such as being not as popular or commonly played, and also the fact that a lot of Shifter decks are for some reason gimped on the ban list, or they're just not as strong as most of the tier 1 and tier 2 decks in general. But yeah, it's basically open multiple hand traps and pray, or open Max C and pray that it resolves, which half the time it doesn't even resolve, and you're only gonna open Max C a third of the time. That's like your counterplay to Snake Eyes. Even Droll, which you think this deck does search, but Droll is against this deck, it's really only about as good as an Imperm or Veiler or Ash on average. And the annoying thing is, if the Snake Eyes player can use Droll as anti-Max C, because again, you can do most, if not all, of your combo line game in your hand through a Droll anyway, so you can just Droll yourself to negate the one possible, the one best counterplay for the deck, which is Max C, and you can use Droll as anti-Max C, which is like something that most combo decks in Master Duel cannot do. So yeah, and this is going to be everywhere, so yeah, get ready for this. And for the next best deck, I feel maybe it's Branded. I'm not sure if any other deck even belongs in the same tier as Snake Eyes, to be honest, but it's not going to be a tier 0 deck, definitely not. We don't have Bonfire, which is kind of the best starter in the deck, and it is still a Master Duel format with Max Ego and all that stuff. But Branded is a deck that I think people could argue pre this selection pack that Branded was the best deck in the game. That, or maybe Super Heavy Samurai. Although Super Heavy Samurai has its own host of problems that Branded doesn't share, such as not being able to run out the cards that beat it, Droll actually, and yeah, Branded can play through probably the Snake Eyes board better than most, because a large portion of that, at least, is hinged on like stuff like Promethean Princess, and the Branded deck does not care as much about destruction effects, and Mirror Jade is still a ridiculous card going first and second. And unlike Snake Eyes, the one advantage that Branded has over it is that it plays very well into Maxi. In fact, it's probably the single best deck in the game at playing into Maxi among the decks that actually special summon. So there's an advantage there. Also, you might expect to see less Super Heavy Samurai. Super Heavy Samurai, I maybe wouldn't say it's the worst matchup for Branded, but it's not a fun matchup. It's like maybe one of the most coin flip matchups in the game, because even if you manage to stop Super Heavy Samurai, Branded is one of the decks that gets really stonewalled by Baguska past the plan B, so that even if you do resolve Draw and Maxi against Super Heavy, you weren't guaranteed to win going second, because you still also had to stop their combo, and then you also have to draw the specific out to Baguska, because your deck's engine cannot out the Baguska itself, and that just made going second in like brutal against Super Heavy. But going first, obviously you were heavily favored, so if you're gonna see less super heavy. I can't imagine Snake Eyes is, even though Snake Eyes is really strong, but I can't imagine it being much worse of a matchup going second that's super heavy samurai. Right. And speaking of, why don't we discuss these two decks together? So these, I think Manadium now and Super Heavy are the two premier combo decks in the game. Manadium especially now with Crimson Dragon out. It's so close to being full power. It's just missing one more card, which is the Vizot Samtar, which is admittedly it is a notable exclusion from the deck, but still, Crimson Dragon now adds to the end board a lot more. Now you get like basically an extra level 10 synchro on top of your regular Despater, Baron, and then like Appaloosa, you know, pseudo FTK combo. And the differences between Manadium and Super Heavy, why I rank Manadium a bit higher than Super Heavy, even though I'm putting both of these a tier below, because they do suffer the problem of hard losing to more hand traps, basically Max C and Droll. And Manadium has the advantage of it can play outs to Droll, and it plays more outs to Max C. It has like, you can play 6 outs to Max C and 3 outs to Droll, whereas Super Heavy Samurai plays 3 outs to Max C and 0 outs to Droll. And you know, that just means that Manadium just has a better chance mathematically of not getting screwed over by one of those two cards. Now, the Super Heavy Samurai does have the advantage of being a deck that, whether it by not really by choice, but just by the fact that it can only run monsters, it has a lot of room for non-engine, so you could run upwards of 17, 18 hand traps. So whereas a single hand trap usually doesn't stop something like Snake Eyes, you can just go quantity over quality and just throw hand traps at them because your deck can afford to run that many. Whereas Manadium does not actually have room for that much non-engine, especially if you decide to include all the outs to Maxi. Manadium is also, the engine itself is also a bit better at playing into boards and going second. The Super Heavy Samurai, it has a very defined choke point going second, especially into removal. So you actually need to depend on your hand traps with Super Heavy to go second with, whereas Manadium can play into boards a bit better, although to a degree, it's probably not going to be sufficient just having engine to play into Snake Eyes and branded boards, but you can potentially make it through if you only draw one non-engine, assuming it's, you know, not like it's a somewhat impactful one. You might consider running more board breakers in that case instead of hand traps, since hand traps may or may not get you anywhere. Then Mathmech is speaking of hand traps, you know, Mathmech is just the deck that runs 16 plus hand traps and then reveals Circular going first to try and get you there. That's not very much to say about it. You know, it is the fact that it runs hand traps is good at a high amount to where you can reliably open 2. It's good versus Snake Eyes. Again, if you're gonna run hand traps, aim to run enough so that you can open 2. It's similar to how you peeled out with Super Heavy Samurai before, although a bit harder because Droll isn't an auto turn skip anymore, so you need to actually rely on drawing even more hand traps. But it can do it, and maybe it doesn't deserve to be in the high tier 1, tier 1.5 as the other decks. Speaking of like decks that I don't think deserve to be up there anymore, How the Mighty Have Fallen, Labyrinth now, I can't really see it as being on the same power level as the tier 1 decks anymore. It's maybe settles at the top of tier 2 in my opinion. You know, the Banlist did hit it lost 1 furniture, so now you go from when it was full power it had 6 furniture, now it has 4 furnitures. So it's like it's basically like you semi-limited the entire furniture set. So it's not like a nothing change to consistency, and you may not even be the correct, well, maybe not correct, but Furniture Labyrinth may not even be the best way to play Labyrinth going forward, especially since one of the benefits or one of the biggest perks last format of playing Labyrinth was that you could turn 0 pitch something like a Shizu Shuffler, or even better, pitch a 5 Rainbow Magician, and then get that active on your opponent's turn 0 before they get to set up. And especially against Super Heavy Samurai, that was devastating. Now you have one less furniture to do that with, and it's... yeah, I'm not sure that's necessarily even the best way to play this deck in this format anymore. Maybe you want to hedge your bets more on winning the games that you can go first in, because if the only disruption you have from Furniture Lab is like a pop from Lovely Lady from after summoning or triggering your Welcome Labyrinth, and then, you know, a couple random back row like a Dogmatic Punishment, that may not even be enough to stop Snake Eyes. Because I know in formats where Snake Eyes, Wanted, Diabellstar is legal, that Labyrinth already kind of struggles against the Snake Eyes matchup, and that's when it has Arias and Transaction Rollback and that support, which Master Duel doesn't even have those yet. So I can imagine how like rough this format can potentially be for Labyrinth. Vanquish Souls is honestly Vanquish Soul. I just realized looking at this that Vanquish Soul is the best shifter deck in the game now, probably. So if that's the case, that means it has a niche of that these other decks don't have, in that it can play 2 extra copies of an auto win hand trap versus Snake Eyes. So that's the thing. And this deck does draw cards, so you can use dig for your auto win hand trap shifter, or dig for like your limited Tisabu. There can be only one. The issue is that the power level of this deck is just really not high anymore compared to all the other stuff. If you don't draw a shifter, it's honestly, I don't know, this deck feels kind of mid, to be honest. So maybe it's better than Labyrinth, maybe it's not better than Labyrinth, but yeah, it's, at least, the very least, it's noteworthy for being the best shifter deck in a format where shifter is really good. And onto some decks that got some support. We have Synchrons. So Synchron's got a lot of new toys in this selection pack. You got Crimson Dragon, but I would argue that Synchron is also maybe one of the better decks or best decks at using the Diabellstar engine. You know, aside from Snake Eyes, but yeah, because the Jet Synchron is a level 1 fire monster, and unlike with other decks that use Diabellstar to get access to Jet Synchron, you know, Jet Synchron in its name is a Synchron monster, so that immediate synergy right there. It also got Crimson Dragon, so I think it has the potential to Calamity Lock, and you know, it got Revolution Synchron itself. Revolution Synchron, again, another Synchron you can use to make level 7 and bridge into like level 8 Synchros. Even though Chaos Ruler is banned, there's still some nice things you can make off that, and I think it's solid. It's just it's a combo deck. So when you're a combo, your balls to wall combo deck, you're competing with stuff like, you know, Manadiums and the Super Heavy Samurais of the world, and it's not as good as that. You know, not as many room for non-engine as Super Heavy Samurai, not as much of a plan or a backup plan when you get Max Seed or Shifter, so just going to Bagusa that Super Heavy Samurai has, and it's not as resilient going second as say Manadium is, but you have room to run tech slots. Like you can run Adventure, Diabellstar, just run a 60 card pile to just you know, just go crazy on your opponent. And Noble Knights, also Infernoble Knights got support in the selection pack, and Isolde is still legal in this game, and it actually, out of all the combo decks, this has one line available to it that actually lets it play through Droll that others don't, and that's Neo Space Connector. So, you know, just summon Aqua Dolphin from your deck and then use Aqua Dolphin effect and get that shifter or get that Droll out of there. It also has multiple level 1 fire monsters to synergize with Diabellstar engine in Renaud and Ricardetto, however you pronounce that new level 1 fire tuner. And yeah, the one thing about an Infernoble Knight in the Master Duel is that it has this Master Duel has this OCG balance quirk where Phoenix Blade, the equip that banishes 2 warriors to add it back to your hand, that's banned. So that reduces your ceiling by quite a bit. When with Isolde, you can't send Phoenix Blade, so you can't also facilitate DDR plays and stuff like that. So this thing is a bit weaker, and it has other issues, you know, like the not having like a very good play line after getting max seed and that stuff. So it's like a maybe a solid tier 2 combo deck, I would say. Rescue Ace. So maybe people are going to be asking about this, but I don't think Rescue Ace is that good right now. In case you didn't know, Rescue Ace, Emergency, and Preventer, neither of those cards are in Master Duel yet for some reason. Again, we got Poplar, which literally is like barely come out in the TCG yet, but there's no Preventer or Preventer or Emergency. So two very important cards for the deck. You can Diabellstar out Fire Hydrant, so you have consistency now, but consistency to do what? I'm not quite sure, to be honest. And then as for Diabellstar, there's any deck. I just want to like put this randomly here. I don't think Diabellstar, it's not gonna change any deck or make them go up a tier or anything, except Snake Eyes. But any deck can and will just randomly play the Diabellstar engine to get Synchron so that it can end on like an extra non-negate or two. But that's not really unique to any single deck because it's pretty generic, and Diabellstar engine you can also use for resources and getting an in-engine negate, so it's to be seen, but because it's like generic applying to any deck, it's not gonna change the tier list very much, but just know that it exists. And you know, we did have a ban list, so the couple decks that were affected negatively by the ban list, not you, Labyrinth, not you losing one furniture, but yeah, there's like two decks that were like heavily affected by the ban list. I guess you can include Branded with the Sarnier limit. I'm talking about the Sarnier going from 3 to 1. Branded could fit in that line, although Branded does not specifically rely on having 3 Sarnier. A lot of builds don't even run 3 Sarnier, especially now with Bestials not being even worse in the meta than they were before, because now you have 2 of the 5 best decks potentially not being affected by Bestials at all in Snake Eyes, a Fire deck, and Super Heavy Samurai, and Earth-based deck. So you might have not even ran 3 Sarnier in Branded anyways, but you definitely had to run 3 Sarnier in Branded Synchro or Branded list, or Branded make Bestial Dissipator plus Verte Anaconda. Yeah, you needed Sarnier to facilitate your play. Sarnier was the best extender in your deck. It dumps Bestial Aluber so you can special Quem. It sends Branded spell traps like Regain. It was like really important, and now I'm not sure if it deserves to be even in tier 2 anymore. Maybe at the top of Rogue or bottom of tier 2. I don't think it's a better combo deck, for example, than any of the new decks that got support, for example. So, and also to go along with that, this Sarnier here represents Bestial Runic, the other deck that potentially got hurt by the Sarnier limit. Now, I don't think the deck would have ran maybe 3 Sarnier anyways, given how little space for non-engine that it has, and how you need so much non-engine to have a chance to beat Snake Eyes, and how Runic really does not facilitate enough room for you to run enough hand traps to be able to consistently open 2, so it might have been a lost cause to play a Runic variant in the first place. But it's definitely, you know, the Sarnier limit did not help the deck, let's just say that. And I guess we can cover the other Runic variants while we're at it quickly. Just like Cherry Runic for Higher Spire, Runic Sprite, all of this stuff. Similar vein. I might have overestimated them last round. I put them all in tier 2. Now I figured it might be just top of Rogue now, because this is not a friendly format to Runic. You see all of these decks up here, right? You need to open specific non-engine against these top decks in order to have a chance to win going second. And Runic builds just do not have enough room to run enough non-engine to be able to beat them, especially Snake Eyes now, because Runic decks, Runic decks can't run Shifter, so the only auto turn ending you have is Maxi. At least when Super Heavy Samurai was the most oppressive combo deck, you could run 3 Maxi and 3 Droll, and then statistically you were more likely to open a hand trap that did stop Ender turn than didn't, but that's no longer the case with Snake Eyes anymore because they don't die to droll. So this is just lose the coin flip and it's death for Runic variants. So yeah, putting these all around a similar level in Rogue. Let's talk Kashtira. So I did last season I was surprised by how decent Kashtira was and how like good a Rise Heart still was and how good Shifter still was basically. And this is probably the next best Shifter deck after Vanquish Souls, but unlike Vanquish Souls, it does have somewhat of a have game even if you don't open Shifter, because a Rise Heart is just Shifter from the extra deck that's permanent, so that's also pretty decent. This is like the anti-meta pick. Again, the issues with Kashtira is not really like how its cards are positioned in the meta. The Kashtira cards are obviously really strong, a Rise Heart is obviously really strong into the meta. It's just sometimes the deck loses to itself because of consistency issues, and you have to build your deck in a way to alleviate that, either by playing Pathfinders, Small Worlds, or multiple copies of Ogre and maxed out on Rise Heart, so you can potentially go into a Tomahawk line, Galaxy Tomahawk into Saryuta to unbreak yourself, which all of them, while these are options that do help consistency, they're not perfect and they are weak to different forms of disruption, or they're not ideal, like going minus a Small World for example. But if the payoff is that you end on a game-ending floodgate from the extra deck, and if people are more going to be on hand traps than board breakers, because board breakers, I guess I should have mentioned that board breakers against these top decks aren't really effective. Their boards are either too strong, too comprehensive for board breakers to deal with, like branded Manadium or super heavy, or literally getting FTK'd by super heavy Samurai still, because that's still a thing, or they don't do anything to like Mathmech Super Factorial, or the Snake Eyes board is too layered, and they have disruption from the graveyard, and they have infinite follow-up, so trying to use board breakers against them is not the best plan. And if people are cutting board breakers, then that just makes a Rise Heart even better. Although watch out for Talons, because that still will clear you. But yeah, it might be. Last time I put it at the bottom row, that was too harsh. Even with the limits, the fact that a Rise Heart is still at 3, and you can even put up double Rise Heart somewhat consistently still, it's like, don't underestimate the deck at your own peril. For some reason, before the ban list, I was the ban list, but before the selection pack, I was facing against so many Kashtira. I was queuing against Kashtira like as the most commonly played deck or something, like more than any of these 4 tier 1 decks, or even than Vanquish Soul above it. So I don't know what's going on, but like people are like possibly catching on to the fact that a Rise Heart is still a good card, shocker. And this next set of like 4 decks, Adagnister, Live Twin, Sprite, which I think is probably still the best Sprite variant, just because it's the only Sprite variant that can run 17 hand traps and isn't running a bunch of limited cards like the Nimbles and like other limited level 2 monsters that Master Duel decide to hit for some reason while keeping Elf legal. And then you have like a couple Tri-Brigade variants, Lyralist Tri-Brigade, and this kit can be either Scareclaw Tri-Brigade or Tri-Brigade Sprite. Basically, these are just decks that run a hell of a lot of hand traps and focus on opening 2 hand traps so that you could stop the decks here, like Snake Eyes specifically. And thing is, these are all generally worse. They're just like Mathmech, but worse in my opinion. Especially if Bystials are falling out of the meta. That was one of the maybe advantages of playing one of these decks, is that they were hit less by Bystials than Mathmech were. But the decks that played Bystials are either moving away from playing as many Bystials, or the Bystials got hit themselves, or the decks that play Bystials are kind of fallen off. So yeah, these are like Mathmech 2.0s, Mathmech Lights. So because they replicate the strategy of like a tier 1.5 or high tier 2 deck, they're still, I would consider them viable in tier 2. They're just like, there's not much reason to play them over Mathmech other than the fact that they can also work, I guess. And if you like the playing the deck, go for it. Flu. I don't know why I keep putting Flu in here, to be honest. Maybe as a meme. just don't. This is the worst shifter deck. It loses to itself way more than it will win games off of shifting your opponent. Oh yeah, where was this? I forgot. I've got the TG's got support in new deck. Yeah, I don't know where this was. Yeah, let's talk about TG's for a second. I think out of all the decks, new decks that got support, which is like Snake Eyes, Synchrons, and Infernoble, I think TG's is probably the worst out of them. But that's because it started off at the lowest point already, so you know it had a lot of catching up to do, and the support definitely, you know, it made the deck playable, and it can, among other things, it can Crimson Dragon to Calamity lock you, which I love that that's in the game now. It's far from the only deck that can do that. I don't even think TG is near like the best deck to be Calamity locking your opponent with, but you know, that's a thing that they can do now, which is more than I could say about it before. So you know what? Props. The support was good. It did help. And yeah, border the stuns. That's another thing. I was facing like a bunch of Kashtira before the selection pack, and I was also facing a bunch of stun. Even though stun is like, unlike Kashtira, stun is actually bad. Like I don't understand. It was. Yeah, I don't know why people are playing this. They don't know how many hits the deck has and like how many of the good floodgates there are. And yeah, I wouldn't. No, would not recommend. I'm sure it's better than Flu, I guess. Technically, there are more floodgates available that you can run, but like, yeah, I don't know about that. Speaking of floodgates, the Dinomorphia. So yeah, I forgot to include this in my last tier list from the last selection pack, but Dinomorphia had support. It got basically it got Intact, which is in archetypes Solemn Warding, or not Solemn Warding, Solemn Strike. So now you can run up potentially up to 6 copies of Solemn Strike. So even though this is a trap deck and going second is hard when you're playing a bunch of cards that aren't good going second, i.e. traps. You know, having more copies of Strike, which is probably the best trap card at going second to like push through your trap cards, it's okay. And if you can somehow set up a Ferret Flames with a Strike, then that's incredible. Although you would have, I don't know how you would get that far in the face of a board, and you know, especially since these boards have pack removal now, sometimes you just get your back row pop before you get a chance to flip your Strike. And here's one really annoying thing about Dinomorphia in this format is that, so doing the math, you activate a card like Frenzy or Domain and you have your life points, so you're at 4k, right? And then Kentragina has your life points again to 2k, and then you use Recturn's effect so that you're at 1k. The issue is, all these Snake Eyes monsters have less than 1k attack. So they're still gonna be able to get some of their effects off. Like, funnily enough, that's the most random, unfortunate interaction about Dinomorphia. So, yeah. Next is Tearlaments Strongest. Well, maybe not anymore, to be honest. The meta shifts I think have been helpful for tier. You know, less Bestials in the format, less Super Heavy Samurai in the format. That's a good thing for tier, since tier was a deck that, like Branded, struggled with outing the Baguska pass of Plan B of Super Heavy after you rolled them. So, you know, that not having to deal with an annoying matchup. Although you do give that one matchup up for another one, which is Snake Eyes. Although this deck, again, like Branded, does not care about destruction removal, so like the Peruvian Princess doesn't really matter. You can just have it trigger your own effects for you, thank you very much. And there's stuff from the new pack that can potentially be usable in tier. I don't know if it's going to be worth it or not. It's maybe interesting to try out, like Revolution Synchron can make Ancient Fury Dragon to help you search field spells, although granted, both of the field spells you want to play, Wraithsop and Purple Rhino, are both limited, so I don't know how relevant that might be. But yeah, you can also make level 7 synchros, like shooting Riser Dragon to dump snow easier. stuff like that. And the Diabellstar engine can you can use to get Jet Synchron from your deck, and then that can make a Vizas Amritara with a tier cache instead of having to rely on milling a Feng Li to get your level 1 tuner out. You can get it directly with Diabellstar engine, although granted that's a lot of space dedicated in your deck for stuff that isn't really a good mill, so maybe worth it, maybe not. And again, tier doesn't, it has room for non-engine now because so many of its cards are on the ban list, but it doesn't have quite enough like Mathmech or these tier 2 hand trap pile decks have, to where you can consistently open 2 hand traps to have a chance against Snake Eyes. So maybe you take a board breaking approach, and this is one of the better decks at utilizing Super Poly and droplets. So there's potential in tier. Tier was very common, although I'm not sure how common it's going to be after the new selection pack. Maybe if there's enough enthusiasts, we can figure out a way to build it for this meta, because right now I'm not quite. I think tier has potential to do something in this format, but I'm not quite sure the right way to go about doing so. What doesn't have potential right now is Purrely. Like, again, just like Labyrinth, there are support cards Purrely was supposed to get before we got popular, that it just never transpired. Baby Noir, Baby Noir, the exceeds you can make off Sleeping Memory. That's not a thing, and as long as that's not a thing, this deck it's not a meta threat. Unfortunately, there's too many. It has too many limits on it to work out. Speaking of Mikanko, it doesn't have limits, but it's limited by the fact that it's a blind second deck, and I don't know why you would want to blind second this format. Look at the top decks. Do you want to blind second against 2 FTK decks, or blind second against Snake Eyes? Like, do you really want to? I don't know about that. To be quite honest, we put us somewhere in Rogue for now. Dragon Link. I really want to give it the tier 2 status, but it might be top of Rogue, to be honest. We can just discuss, like, basically either thinking of like the best Rogue deck or the worst tier 2 deck. Since Bystials are just getting worse and worse with each format, and this is a deck that plays a lot of Bystials, and this is a deck that also struggles to play going into boards that have pop effects. So, a Promethean Princess alone might stop some of your turns, which is unfortunate, and that's going to be everywhere because of Snake Eyes. And unfortunate is basically the way to describe Dragon Link. There is some synergy with the Diabellstar engine, potentially, although other people more creative than me are cooking with Diabellstar Dragon Link. I'm not sure if that's like an actual thing that will help it place in this meta, or if it's just like something fun to play. But yeah, not looking good for our scaly friends. And Moye. So Sword Soul. I've said enough. Sword Soul, it's fine. It's a rogue deck. I'm not gonna say it's bad or anything. Like it's don't kill me, Hexlex. But yeah, everyone's gonna have Sword Soul now because we got the free structure deck. So if you're a new player, it's fine to start the game with Sword Soul. Sword Soul's probably one of the best starter decks in the game. That you can get for free. Out of all the structure decks, definitely Sword Soul is up there, and it has a ceiling. It's rogue, and if you combine it with Super Heavy Samurai, which might be the best version of Super Heavy Samurai Sword Soul, it's like the Sword Soul cards are holding the Super Heavy Samurai cards back. So I don't know. I guess you run that if you're a real fan of Sword Soul. If you still want to synchro summon Shisao, banish Blackout, add Longa into your hand, and special your worms, but also have a competitive deck. And I guess you can sacrifice non-engine slot to Super Heavy for Sword Soul cards, but yeah, I'm not gonna put it that much higher, like, because that's not really the Sword Soul cards doing the heavy lifting, right? Maybe not. So yeah, that's just meta at a glance. Let me check if there's anything egregious here or anything that looks funny. Okay, this I don't know what this is. I don't even know what this means. This isn't a real deck. This is just an engine. So like, this doesn't mean anything. Pretend this is not here. Yeah. I don't know what I was doing putting this here. Yeah, this isn't a real deck. Just think of this as any one of these decks could potentially be running this card. Yeah, Dinomorphia might be better than Purrely. Yeah, maybe. Probably, actually. So yeah, feel free to, in a month, come back to this video and in the comments tell me how wrong I am. Because God knows I got something very, very wrong last month too.